Hey everybody, it's Peter. This is the 2023 Suzuki Boulevard M109R. This thing is an absolutely amazing cruiser, and I'm gonna be honest with you, the reason I'm filming it is because I walked by it in the showroom and thought, wow, this thing does not look as good online as it does in person. It's really impressive, and as I started to dig into it, I realized it's not just the looks that make it super impressive. So we're gonna talk about this thing in detail and tell you why I think it's a cruiser that way more people should be considering, because this thing is super cool. So I'm filming here at McLean Sports. They give me complete access to their entire vehicle lineup, so whether it's snowmobiles, ATVs, side-by-sides, or especially motorcycles, if you have a question about anything that I'm filming on this channel, make sure you let me know in the comments below and hit the subscribe button, because I will make sure that I respond to you both in the comment section and in future videos. And especially if you have a question about this bike that I don't get to in this video, I can come back to this bike again and again and again to create a video database of all the information that we need to make sure we have everything you would need to see if this is the right bike for you. Let's get going with this review. So let's place this in the sort of motorcycle world. First of all, we're gonna show you it up close because just the body lines are pretty amazing when you see it up close. It just really is a cool unit. But I wanna talk about where this sits in the cruiser lineup because it's kind of special. It is a big cruiser. It's over 700 pounds, but I can tell you this feels nowhere near as intimidating as a 500-pound adventure bike because of that low seat height. It's very well balanced. There's some sort of magic going on here. I've sat on 700+ pound cruisers before, and this one just feels a lot lighter to me to maneuver around. So it's kind of not that intimidating for its weight, but there are some intimidating pieces here. This is a massive engine here. When we talk about massive engines, let's just put it in perspective. A little bit later today, I'm gonna film the Yamaha MT-09. That's a 900cc bike. Many people consider it kind of a sport bike. Hyper naked is what Yamaha calls it. This, one of the two cylinders, this is only a two-cylinder V-twin, one of these two cylinders displaces more than the entire MT-09 engine. So it's just a massive, like ridiculously large engine that produces a whole bunch of horsepower and a whole bunch of torque. And then even the tire here, that MT-09 that I was talking about, it's got a pretty wide tire, 180 millimeters. This one, that tire is only 75% the width of this one. This thing's absolutely massive. I'll show it to you on camera, but it won't look the same on camera. It's just ridiculously huge. And that's kind of the fun with this. If you think cruisers are kind of slow or kind of boring to drive, but cool to look at, this one is cool to look at, and it is an absolute amazing vehicle to drive because the way it makes power with its big V-twin is completely different than a typical sport bike. So you have sport bikes with similar horsepower numbers to this, but the feel, the whole way it works is gonna be completely different, and again, way, way, way more torque. So we're gonna talk about what this looks like. We're gonna start by looking at the front wheel, going our way back through this bike, coming across the top, looking at the dash, making sure we cover everything we can for you so you have a pretty good idea of what this bike's all about. All right, so if you're interested in this bike, you're probably wondering, why am I focusing on the front wheel first instead of the motor first? Well, this is one of the things I do, and I think it's important to point out this front wheel before we get to the motor. So every time I do a review, I talk about the front wheel. If you take a look at the front wheel of pretty much any motorcycle, you can tell the manufacturer's intent for what this bike is. And I have to admit, this thing looks like a sport bike out front. It's got a whole bunch of things that you don't typically see on a cruiser. So you already can sort of feel this is a sort of a sporting cruiser. Now, usually I start with the mechanicals, but let's just start with the body design for a second here first. You've got the upside down forks, which is a mechanical piece, but the body design, you've got that shielding here to keep all of your bugs and splatter and everything else out of the shocks, to keep your fork tubes nice and clean, which was gonna allow you to have a good fork seal. So just the body work is set up for that, but it's sort of an aerodynamic detail. You don't often see a lot of aerodynamic details on cruisers. It's usually only about style, but here the style blends in with that aerodynamics, which is kind of cool to me. Let's talk about the actual mechanicals. We mentioned those upside down forks. So why do you have these on a sport bike and why would you have them on a cruiser? Well, first of all, you have a little bit less unsprung weight. Now, I don't think this bike is going for crazy low weight in any way, but that's one of the reasons you would do this. The other reason you would do this is for a very stiff, the stiffest part is up here now instead of having the weaker part up there. So you've got a very stiff riding or stiff frame, stiff section on this, which is again, a very fast bike and a very heavy bike. You want good stiffness here to have that precise handling and control. Then Then you've got typical drilled out disc, again, a floating disc here. You can sort of see that, how that works. This is very typical of a sport bike. And you've got radial mount calipers here. So you can sort of see the way it's mounted there. That is very, very sport bike and higher end sport bike in styling. You know, good Brembo brakes are all going to be mounted like that kind of thing. These ones happen to be Tokiko, very quality braking, and it's a dual disc setup. So the same thing you see on this side is the same thing on the other side. Alloy wheel here, and then the rubber itself, very much a sport bike style rubber, you know, the shape to it. A lot of time the shape of the front tire will be a little more cruiser-like. So you already see that this is a very sporting cruiser. And now let's move our way through and talk about what else is kind of sporting about this. All right, let's take a look at the heart of this bike, and it really is pretty special. 1783 cc, 1783 cc. Like I mentioned, just one of these cylinders is a larger volume cc than the entire M109 engine, all three cylinders on that bike. So just massive, massive cylinders here. And of course, in a V-twin lineup, now they do look like they're air-cooled. They've got some design there, but you have a fairing in here that actually looks pretty cool the way it kind of comes up into the tank. And that, of course, is liquid-cooled. So you have a fully modern liquid-cooled. Now, I say fully modern. Nothing about this bike is overly modern, and you'll see that as we go through. But I mean, I kind of like that in an era where, you know, a Honda CR-V has a 1.5 liter engine. This thing's basically a 1.8 liter engine. So it's just a massive engine. Like I said, there's small and mid-sized crossovers that have less displacement. And, you know, there's no replacement for displacement. Start throwing a massive engine on something that's really not that heavy for what it is, and you end up with a really unique vehicle. So power is absolutely a focus on this thing, and it really is incredible. Everything about this is large. The header's coming off, everything, the air filter there, it's just massive looking. But like I said, there's not an intimidation factor when you're sitting on this bike. So let's pull out and talk about why this engine works well and what it does differently. So one of the cool things about cruisers, and again, when you think of Suzuki, they're kind of known for their, you know, Gixxers GSX line, the sport bike line. What Suzuki does really well with every line of bike that they have is they make a really good sort of adventure tourer in like the V-Strom. They make a really good sport bike. They've also clearly done their homework when it comes to cruisers. Now, they didn't try to create something that competes with everybody else. They created something different. So a V-twin engine is going to give you that torquey feel. And a lot of, for instance, Harley Davidsons, let's be honest, that's where you're talking when you're talking big V-twins. A lot of them, at least up until recently, haven't been that fast. They've been a lot of torque, but not always a ton of horsepower. So from a pure horsepower number, this thing is a superbike type horsepower number, but it also has similar torque numbers. So the rumor is around 123 or so horsepower, 127 horsepower. It's right around up to 130 horsepower, depending on who you look at and what you believe. But it's also got about 118 foot-pounds of torque. Normally, the difference between horsepower and torque on a sport bike with that much number is, you know, significantly different. You know, it's much less. These numbers are almost the same in foot-pounds and horsepower. You'll see almost half of the foot-pounds that this would have in a typical sport bike. And a sport bike has power in a very narrow power band. So you're going to use a 6-speed transmission to keep it in that higher revs, whereas this thing, traditionally a V-twin has power down low and in the mid-range. This thing has power everywhere because it's got so much. So you've got a 5-speed transmission driving this massive V-twin, but everywhere in every gear you have tremendous power. On the highway you have relaxed cruising and tons of passing power, and that's kind of the fun of this, is that in no way is this a slow, boring cruiser. It handles decently, and like I said, there's not really an intimidation factor when you sit on this. You can see I'm about 6 feet tall, not overly huge guy, the seat's low, you know, you're certainly spread wide out here, but there's really not, it's just not an intimidating bike to sit on. You can kind of feel like you can, I don't want to tip it too far here, but you can really feel like you have good control of it, even just with your hips, and certainly with your arms. It is a very large feeling bike just to sit on, which I think is what people are looking for in this segment, but it's not an intimidating thing. So that kind of means that as you come stoplight to stoplight, no problem. If you want to drag race a sport bike, you could probably do it. But also, as you're going out and cruising, doing other things, if you want to add a windshield on this, you could. But even just leaving it the way it is, that open air freedom, and you are truly a king of the road. So it just is cool the way it works and that it exists, because in a world where, you know, everything's kind of going for smaller engines, even 4-cylinder sport bikes are disappearing for 3 and 2 cylinders. Some of those are, you know, changing around. This is still a massive, massive V-twin that just creates all kinds of power in all kinds of ways that they don't do anymore. So that's part of what makes it super cool. So when we're going to talk power, we have to talk about putting power down. Now, this is a styling exercise, but it has some value, it has some merit as a traction piece as well. This is impossible to show on camera, but a wide sport tire, 180, in fact 190 is the Hayabusa and rear tire. That's how big that is. It is like 75% of the width of this. This is wider than many car tires. It is absolutely massive, and it's so hard to show on camera how big it is. Now it does provide you some practical benefits. Not only is it fairly wide, it's actually 1 inch bigger diameter wheel than the something like the Hayabusa, which has a 17-inch rear wheel. So that 18-inch rear wheel, you know, you make a little bit bigger wheel, you create a little bit more surface area. So there's a lot of surface area on the ground. Although this is purely for style, or you know, mostly for style, it will provide you some benefit in traction with this highly powerful engine. So you're not going to be, you know, spinning this tire, you know, like it's a little skinny donut, spinning it with all that power. So this does really provide some practical benefit over just style. And again, this doesn't show on camera, doesn't show on your TV, your screen, your phone, whatever you're watching this on. You have to see this in person. I walked by this person and thought, what? Suzuki makes one of those? It's incredible. Taking a look at the dash on this bike, you're going to see some retro cruiser stuff. First of all, the key is down sort of, you know, just below the seat, typical cruiser location, so it's not up here in the dash here. Now it is a bit of a split dash. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom into the top portion first for a second. We're going to do a quick instant zoom here, and you can sort of see how the tack works. Very simple, about 7,500 RPM redline. Again, it doesn't matter what gear you're in, you're going to be revving this out. You don't have to rev this out to make power, but you do have a tack that's within your line of sight looking forward. So we're going to zoom back out now. Actually, we'll go fully wide angle, and you can kind of see how it looks. This is not curved with the tank. It does pop up on an angle to sort of face the driver, and that pops up, you know, it's sort of completely facing. So this is facing this way, this is facing that way, and then your tank rolls down. So kind of a perspective of how we're looking at things here. Let's zoom into the speedometer here. I kind of like this as well. We'll zoom one more in here. This is very, let's just come out a little bit. This is very retro, but effective as well. So again, speedometer goes to 240 kilometers per hour. If you're Americans looking at the 240, it's kilometers, not miles an hour. We're filming here in Canada. But you've got selection down here. You can go trip 1, trip 2, odometer, and that's it. You got a fuel gauge and a clock on this side, and that's all you need. So again, sort of basic cruiser type stuff, which I kind of like. It's that retro stuff, everything you need, nothing you don't. But I do like having that tack up top. A lot of bikes don't have tacks, but with something with this much power, sometimes you may want to rev it out just to sort of see what it does, and at least you can see the red line. What I'm realizing right now is I'm failing to do this bike justice. With the angle turned like this, it just looks like a really narrow bike. It's not actually narrow at all. I just did want to show that your driving lights here, the signal lights, they are on with your headlight, so you do have sort of an extra width headlight there. But again, the angle doesn't do this bike justice. It's very difficult to film this bike or take pictures of it to show, you know, sort of the muscular lines of it. But it is definitely a muscular looking bike, even though I'm doing a poor job of showing that right here. Let's take a quick look at the handlebars, the controls, and we'll move on. So left side controls, pretty simple stuff. One thing I do like is the grips here. Suzuki could have just gone to their parts bin and pulled something out, but they do have extra sort of, to me, a little bit extra diameter grips here. They feel kind of nice. They have a little bit of a rubbery to them. Again, not a real cushy rubber, but some rubber feel there. So you feel like you've got a good grip on them, even with your bare hands. Obviously, we're all supposed to ride with gloves, but hey, your fashion, don't take fashion advice from me, you know, just maybe some safety advice. But yeah, they feel good even in your bare hands. Flash to pass right up there for your high beam, high low beam, and these are nice big clunky switches. So you know, it just kind of fits the style of this bike. Signal light here, horn down there, and you do have four-way flashers or hazard lights on there as well, which I'm a big fan of. I think they should have that on more bikes, but you do have that here. Other side, start switch, kill switch, that's it. So for a basic walk around review, there's not a whole lot more to show on this bike, but let's talk about who it's for. First thing we should talk about is pricing. A lot of cruisers are kind of overpriced. You pay a lot for old technology and you're paying for a style. Sometimes you're paying for a brand name. I think Suzuki understands that they're not a huge player in the cruiser market, so they have to take something like this and make a huge splash with it. And that's really what they've done. There's nothing too new about this bike at all. It's got the basic stuff. I mean, even just looking down here, I still see the steering wheel lock is down there with the key lock. You know, some bikes you can do that from the key itself. But again, this is a classic cruiser in every sense of the way. And in a world that is moving to electrified vehicles, to hybrids, and like I said, to mid-size SUVs with smaller displacement engines than this isn't going to be around forever, and there's a value to it. Suzuki prices it accordingly. It is super stylish, impossible to show on camera, but walking around this, the bulbous nature of the tank, the bulbous sort of rear end, the massive rear tire, the size of the engine, even visually, is super impressive. But then you also have something that is a modern ride, and that's one of the reasons that I'm not as big of a cruiser fan as some of you are, is to me, cruisers don't brake well usually. They don't accelerate that well, and especially compared to other options out there, where this thing brakes very well. It's got very good quality brakes, it's got good, strong, powerful brakes, and it has good acceleration. So who is this for? To me, you could be a value shopper looking for a cool cruiser that not everybody has. This thing sounds amazing. This thing goes like nothing else, and it just has that feeling like nothing else on the road, whether it's 2 wheels or 4 wheels. And that's what makes this thing kind of amazing. It's like a V10 Viper, but in a controllable package that's just, you know, all grunt and high horsepower. It's just a really cool bike. So again, for a walk around review, there's not a whole lot more to show you. This is a demo bike. If it's still around the summer, I'm gonna see if I can take it out and do a ride with it. It is absolutely an interesting bike, and it's absolutely a cruiser you should consider if you can get by the fact that it doesn't have, you know, classic HD name on or something like that. This is a bike that gives you, it's just something that's going to stand out visually. It's the reason you buy a cruiser. It sounds cool, it feels cool. Even the engine, it doesn't, because it's so large, the V-twin has a natural vibration to it. But when I say vibration, it's a thump thump more than a buzzy vibe. And with this big engine, you're going to feel that thumpiness of the engine, but it's going to be in a sense smooth because it is so large. There's just nothing like this. So if you're interested in this bike, you can check it out here at McLean Sports. Again, this one's sitting here right now. It's January 2024. This is, I believe, a demo model. We talked about the kilometers on it. I don't think I saw how many were on here. Let's just check it here. This one has 2,890 kilometers, so it's been around a little bit, but it is still a very new bike, and of course they're still making this. Suzuki still has it for 2024, so if you want to buy a new one, you can buy it from McLean's as well. Check it out at McLean's. If you have any other questions, check it out here on our channel, and if you've made it this far, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you in the next one.